Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update for the 1st of March 2024. Pinching a punch for the first of the month. No returns. Where should we start? We'll start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and you can, of course, find those caveats in the description to this video below. And it has been a day that is somewhat in line with the last couple of days. So an uptick in some of these categories, higher than average numbers for tanks, armoured personnel vehicles and artillery systems lost. And personnel lost 920. That's a big number, not over 1,000, but still at the upper ends of the range. The average on a daily basis is 575 at the moment, or thereabout, so that is considerably above average. 17 tanks likewise, armoured personnel vehicles at 30 and artillery systems at 36, also well above average. So this is a very good day for the Ukrainians on that front. Now, it's worth knowing that the Ukrainians will be losing a lot of personnel and equipment as well. I heard from a contact that I think, well, shall I say, some equipment was thrown into, I think, possibly the Orlivka and maybe the Krasnohorivka area, but certainly Avdiivka's Orlivka area. And we know that the Ukrainians did repel the Russian attacks in both places. They've done a good job there, but it has come, I believe, at quite a cost in terms of vehicles. 100 vehicles sent into there, and not many of them have survived by some accounts. I can't prove that, but it is, some news from the front is that the Ukrainians have lost some considerable equipment there. Russians, to continue, the Russians have lost 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, 54 vehicles and 10 pieces of special equipment. Those last two categories, very high numbers there. So the logistics being hurt and special equipment being taken out as well, excavators and likewise. Right, as we go to Andrew Perpetua's loss statistics that he gathers from the socials, our paths didn't cross yesterday morning, and so therefore his list came out after my video, and so we have 2 lists to go through because his one for yesterday is now already out. So 2 days worth of his stats. Let's have a look at them, and you can see the days are just giving huge numbers of equipment losses actually for both sides, but for 2 days ago, although the Ukrainians lost quite a bit, the Russians lost a vast amount of stuff. That's at probably a 3.5 to 1 ratio, which is a sort of ratio that Ukraine desperately need. Let's look at the Ukrainian losses and compare them to the Russian losses. So, Ukrainians lost 3 pieces of surveillance equipment, a drone that shot down, I wouldn't include that, 3 boats, 3 pieces of artillery, it's a couple of tanks, T-72 and an unknown, Bradley infantry fighting vehicle and the BMP-1. So Bradley damaged is going to be a bit of an issue for the Ukrainians, but essentially, you're going to add an M113 and BTR to that, some older APCs and civilian vehicles. It's not a huge set of expensive losses. It will hurt the Ukrainians, of course, but it's not. I mean, just go to look at the Russian losses. And we have some general artillery, a couple of boats thrown in there as well, and then a lot of tanks, including a T-90. That's probably the one I showed you on yesterday's segment. We have a lot of abandoned vehicles here, both in infantry fighting vehicles and tanks. These are usually lost as they get hit afterwards. Infantry fighting vehicles, just a massive array of BMPs, BTRs, a huge number of vehicles. Goodness me, is that what? It's got to be 20 to 30 infantry fighting vehicles there. That's got to be the largest haul of a single category of equipment that I've seen on Andrew Perpetua's list since he started doing them. And then quite a big array of APCs there, BTRs, MTLBs, a large number of them anyway. And then trucks and only one civilian vehicle, and then a whole bunch of Desert Cross, those little almost like golf cart buggies that the Chinese have provided to to the Russians. They provided quite a number of them, so they're used particularly around the Krinky area by the Russians. Um, they can like scoot around the sandy grounds there. But yeah, just that is a huge set of losses for the Russians. Just phenomenal. So the value of that far exceeds the value of the Ukrainian losses. Um, and then we come to today's losses that look like a 2-to-1 ratio, maybe just over 2-to-1. So again, good for the Ukrainians, but not as good maybe as you would like. So let's have a look at what the Ukrainians have lost, and bear in mind there's a decoy at the bottom there, so you can take that off. So radar, KP5N63S radar, and 2 air defense pieces. Now we're going to show you that. This is a really high value loss. So missile strike taking out an S-300 launcher, 5P8SS, I think that is, or 5S, that's 5S. Air defense system. So S-300 launcher is a highly valuable piece of kit that the Ukrainians use. And then a Book M1 as well. That's the older version of the book, but still that's going to be a sore loss, taken out by Krasnopol, which is a laser-guided precision-guided munition fired from artillery. So the equivalent, I guess, of the Excalibur round, although it's used differently. The mechanism is different. AS-90, or the guidance is different. AS-90 or Crab, they use the same turret, so it's quite difficult to tell the difference between the Polish, South Korean Crab and the British AS-90. So that's why he, writes them like that. And a Susanna 2. So this is all of these are high-value bits of kit, I would say. Okay, the Crabs or AS-90s are not necessarily the high, they're not super duper. They are, the AS-90 is a bog standard 1990 self-propelled gun from the UK. It's just half decent, but they don't have endless supplies of this stuff, right? Susanna 2 is a newer bit of kit, and that is a sore loss. You put that together with 2 air defense systems and a radar. This is a significant loss for the Ukrainians. And we've got the Leopard 2A6, a Marder, a Bradley. So I referenced a string of Ukrainian losses as a result of a dump of Russian footage. That vehicle war, what's it? That's not War Vehicle Tracker, is it? Released yesterday and said, I've edited this video, taken out the gore, and these are stuff that was lost, and I listed those items to you. I think this is now reflected in the lost stats for Andrew Perpetua. So this is a bad day at the office, although I think it's probably taken place over a longer period of time. There's no guarantee that took place in the last 24, 48 hours. My guess is probably that's the last month with like a dump of Russian footage. And of course that can happen with the Ukrainians as well, but I think the Ukrainians are just more consistent in the way that they release their footage. They're just doing it all the time. You get these big dumps from the Russians that happen possibly strategically. I don't know if it tells us something. Right, let's go and look at the Russian losses. So the Russians had a huge number of losses the day before, quite a large number again in the last 24 hours, but we'll see whether it's the same value. You've got a Tor M there, an air defense system, so that's fairly high value. A couple of surveillance and comms and an engineering vehicle. Artillery there, fairly bog standard. A range of tanks, including another T90M, so that's quite a high value bit of kit. They don't have... But I'd like to see the latest stats for T90s, because they only had 100 T90Ms. The breakthrough version, the best version of their best tank, if you like, only had 100 of them. And months ago, they were down to having lost 40% of them. So my guess is they might well have lost sort of 2/3 of their T90Ms now, and that would be really significant. A range of BMPs, infantry fighting vehicles, and APCs as well, and trucks and civilian vehicles. So although the Russians have lost a lot more kit here, the value of the Ukrainian kit far exceeds, I think, the Russian kit. So that is, all things considered, over the 2 days, the Russians have lost vast quantities of stuff, and the Ukrainians have lost quite a quantity of stuff, and actually the Ukrainians can ill afford to do so. And I think the quantity of Russian losses goes some way towards the value of what the Ukrainians have lost, particularly in this list. But I think on balance, if you were Russian, you would take those higher losses, higher loss numbers against the high value equipment that we can see that the Ukrainians have lost here. But the Russians are not left in a good place either. Now, of course, this doesn't include the plane losses that we've heard about, because it's very hard to visually evidence that. Those happen hundreds of kilometers behind Russian lines sometimes, in the case of the A-50. But certainly in terms of the jets, that's, I think, happening, the fighter bombers, Su-34s, maybe 100 kilometers behind enemy lines. Now, you're not going to find visual evidence of that, but it is really significant. So you can add those to those lists and say, well, actually, on balance, the Russians have been absolutely hammered because they've lost, 3 Su-34s yesterday. Okay, so the loss of those planes, says Thomas Tyner, means that the US gave Ukraine a new interceptor for the Patriot, either a not disclosed Patriot PAC-2 GEM missile with active radar homing, or a not disclosed variant of the Navy's SM-6 Block 1. There's a low probability it's an active radar homing SM-2ER Block 4. Okay, whatever that means, basically you've got much more capable missiles that have not been registered on donations to Ukraine, but the Ukraine might end up having these and using them. But there's a lot of speculation as to how Ukraine are shooting down these jets. As you can see from these loss stats here, since the beginning of the year, Ukraine have claimed to have shot down or hit a total of 15 aircraft, 10 Su-34, 2 Su-35, 2 A-50s, and an IL-22. The vast majority of these not yet being confirmed by open sources. So in other words, most of these don't have video evidence to go along with them. There is some satellite imagery that's come out to show a number of scorch marks, like places that look very much like downed planes in the places where we think those planes have been downed, but it's very hard to fully confirm that. Now, Trentilenko speculates that Russian fears Ukraine has operational S-200 batteries, so rather than being a Patriot, it's the older S-200 system that has been adapted and then can be placed in a larger network of decent radars that mean that you get this kind of Franken-SAM network rather than Franken-SAM single object, like a book firing Sea Sparrow missiles or RIM-7 missiles. That's like a Franken-SAM launcher. But actually, you can see it as a whole Franken-SAM system. It's like things bolted on using this central network, this Link 16 and other capabilities that allow all of these things to be linked together. So you can plug in an S-200 and it's improved in its capabilities due to the network that it's plugged into. So Trentilenko says the VKS, the Russian Air Force, don't have a fielded jammer capable of blocking S-200 square pair radar, rocking 100,000 watts of 6 gigahertz radiated power for 100 square meter radar cross section A50U. What does that mean? Bugger if I know. Russia don't have a particular capability that Trentilenko seems to indicate that they need, due to the fact this A-50 is not in the sky on the fourth day. This helps to destroy Russian planes. The spokesman for the Air Force of Ukraine, Yuri Ignat, said the occupiers come to the conclusion that there is nothing to mess around with in our Sea of Azov. In this way, they pushed away. It is clear that the enemy receives less information about our radar stations, anti-aircraft defenses that emit radiation. The enemy detects the latter with the help of an air radar, which is the A-50. Now, just to give you the understanding of how important A-50s are, and if you believe that the world is flat, then unfortunately, this segment's not going to be for you. So you cannot believe the world is flat and get involved in modern warfare, because the curvature of the Earth plays a massively important role in how radars get used. So ground-based radar systems fire off their radar, if you like, in a straight line, and because of the curvature of the Earth, the straight line goes up like that. It can't bend around the curvature of the Earth, and as such, the planes can fly low. That's why they like flying low, because they can't get spotted by radar, and they fly low because of the curvature of the Earth. So the radar's going up like that. They fly low and as close as they can get to that where they think that radar is going, and then do their stuff and then turn around and fly away. Now, to overcome the issue that the curvature of the Earth brings to the game, to overcome that, you get an A50U or an AWACS plane up in the air that then sends its radar sort of downwards like that. And so you get the ground-based radar going up like this, unable to see over here. And then you get the A50U up here, being able to see over here by that kind of radar capability. You take that out twice, and then you're back to ground-based radar that the Ukrainians are also trying to take out as well explicitly. And it allows your planes to operate at least at low levels. It's not so cool at operating at high levels. And that then means that actually releasing JDAMs and whatnot becomes more problematic because they require you to be higher so they can go further because they're dropped out there, those guided glide bombs. But yeah, so they can't be used so effectively by the Ukrainians. They have to operate quite low, so maybe that's going to benefit things like helicopters firing unguided rockets and stuff like that. But nonetheless, that's a situation. Now, the Russians, because the Ukrainians rely on AWACS that are being used by international partners in international airspace, they don't really have their own radar planes operating like this. So I believe the Russians are just much more able to get their planes flying higher, much closer to the lines, and drop their carb bombs and FAB bombs. And what that means is that if you look at the use of JDAMs versus the use of carb bombs, the Russians use them way more because the Russians can fly with greater impunity. However, you could argue this is changing now because the Russians have lost a ton of planes because AWACS have been taken down. You might have planes flying closer to the line, firing at those Russian planes, or you might have just this better radar setup, ground-based radar with something like a longer-range Patriot system. Anyway, still lots of speculation going on. Yuri Ignat said Ukraine has a weapon that can reach Russian planes at a long distance, commenting about the 13 planes in less than 2 weeks. Ukraine has weapons that reach Russian aircraft at a long distance, and Russian aircraft have worked and continue to work. They do not fly close to the combat line, but surprises await them at long distances. Okay, but what's then interesting is Ukrainian journalist and military analyst Alexander Kovalenko has said, according to Karb, that's a Russian FAB airdrop bomb, despite the increased shooting of the Su-34s, the intensity of the use of those frontline bombers with fighter functions has not decreased, and even more so. In other words, previously, when we've seen Patriots take out the three around Kherson, we saw a drop in the use of those planes, at least for some time, before they then built up the confidence to think that Patriot moved on and they could continue bombing the crap out of Kherson. Well, actually, this week it appears that they haven't dropped their intensity of usage of those planes. And that's really risky. They're still sending those fighter bombers out, even though they're being shot down. So this guy says, thus, over the past 24 hours on February the 29th, an absolute record for the use of carb was set, 152. So they are dropping these even more. They're losing those planes, but then it appears that they've just got a lot of planes up in the skies, dropping these, 152. It's also worth bearing in mind that the Russians have also increased the capacity of bombs on these planes. So originally it was 2, then it's moved to 4, and I think they're planning, or they may have even succeeded in getting it to 6, which means you need fewer planes to drop more bombs. Previously, the absolute record for Karb was set in February at 16 to 17. In the amount of 151, of which 94 were deployed in Avdiivka and on its outskirts of Avdiivka, that's a huge increase. So over the past 24 hours, the most intensive place of Karb arrivals was also on the outskirts of Avdiivka. So the enemy wipes out the village of Tonyenka from the face of the earth. More than 30 Karbs flew through it and 10 through Orlivka. So this is frontline fighting, combined arms maneuvers from the Russians, where they're using they're using artillery and infantry fighting vehicles, dropping off troops. Troops are attacking on the ground, but also with the support of not so much close air support, in the sense of helicopters going around and fighter jets coming very close, but actually kind of far air support, if you like, but dropping precision guided munitions. They're not the most precise, but they're precise enough to give great support to the troops attacking, because you can flatten the villages and then move your troops in. All this indicates that despite the losses of the Su-34, the work of the CARB continues. That is, planes and pilots are sent with the awareness of the high risks of destruction of both the aircraft and the crew. For one example reason, the CARB is the only tool for opening our defensive lines and fortified areas. Without the CARB, Russian troops will significantly lose their effectiveness in offensive operations. This is how freaking important the CARBs are. So this is what, and the Ukrainians have known this, which is why the Ukrainians have brought forward their Patriots or whatever it is. They have increased their capability of shooting those planes down because they know they need to take risks in shooting that stuff down. Maybe that's why you've seen an S-300 get taken out recently. They're bringing this stuff forward to shoot these planes down, and the planes, though, or at least the command, recognize that even though they're going to lose some planes, if they want to take these villages and take this land by March the 17th, if they want to be successful in this counterattack, they are going to have to lose planes because they need those CARB bombs. Without those bombs, Ukraine will be able, even with their crap artillery ammunition stocks situation, they'll broadly be able to stop the Russians from advancing. Why Russia did so well in Avdiivka as the main city of that, as I keep telling you, was a lack of artillery ammunition for the Ukrainians, but the use of those bombs. Those CARB bombs blew the crap out of Avdiivka, and it meant it was very difficult to, I mean, imagine trying to defend against oncoming infantry and, infantry fighting vehicles and tanks and whatnot. And you're there on the ground fighting that, and you get artillery, you get mortar, and you get these KAB 500 bombs, or 1,500 kilogram bombs, blowing the absolute crap out of you. No wonder the Ukrainians had to retreat. And so that has then continued in these villages to the west of Avdiivka, and the Russians are losing planes hand over fist, but it's still, in their eyes, it's still worth it because these CARBs are so effective. And not just they're so effective, they are integral for any success on the ground. They can't get success on the ground without the use of those aerial bombs. That's my interpretation of what's going on. Let me know what you think. Situation is stalemate for them because such intensity of flights of Russian aircraft allows us to catch them more often, but it should be understood that for every plane shot down, there are several dozen flights that were not intercepted. For example, over the past day, here were more than 150 sorties of Su-35, Su-34, and Su-25. Wow. So, they're now playing all in, and as we know, it's impossible to play all in for a long time for them. The Russians appear to be able to rather like it's the same tactics in the air as it is on the ground. We're going to lose an absolute ton of infantry fighting vehicles. Let's go back to here. We're going to lose a ton of infantry fighting vehicles and tanks and APCs. Look at those losses. We are going to lose those, but we are going to take Avdiivka. And actually, that's the same theory in the air. We are going to lose a bunch of Su-34s, but we are going to take Avdiivka. It's the same calculus that they're making here. Again, let me know what you think, whether I'm well out or not. Right, okay, going to maritime stuff now. Russian media reporting that the icebreaker Ermak is on fire in St. Petersburg. I just absolutely cacked myself there. Why does that happen? I press play and I pause and it just takes it off mute. But then when I do it again, it doesn't. Oh, it's so random. Anyway, Russian media offer different reasons for the fire. Some write that the garbage caught fire. Others claim that the fire could have started allegedly due to welding works. Nonetheless, that is an icebreaker in St. Petersburg that is on fire. Good news for the Ukrainians there. Submarine has been tugged around today in Novorossiysk, the Kilo Pen, so where they keep the Kilo class submarines. No idea if it means something or normal ops, just noticed. So you would expect it to just motor on its own engines, but it's being tugged about. Could be completely normal, or it could have been hit. There are things that are happening in Russia, and that includes Novorossiysk, no doubt, with Ukrainian missiles and Ukrainian drones. We know that they're producing 100,000 drones a month at the moment. Not all of those are going to be these kind of drones, but they are apparently also keeping pace with the Russian procurement of Shahed drones. And so those drones are going to be used. We are not hearing about them on a nightly basis, but rest assured there will be damage being caused. Could there be a submarine that's taken a hit? I don't know. If I was the Ukrainians, I would be aiming for moored submarines with these drones all the freaking time. I mean, that would be a massive haul because these send up cruise missiles. I'd be looking at the fleet that sends cruise missiles, and I'd be raining all hell down on them with drones as they're moored in Novorossiysk. And yes, Novorossiysk is going to have the best air defenses for sure, but I'd be waiting, stockpiling to overwhelm it, just as the Russians do to the Ukrainians. So Andrei Yermak yesterday very cryptically says, looking eyes, and then a boat on the sea. PS01 says another submarine. Well, actually, no, it looks like they're in the Sea of Azov, so that is to the northeast of Crimea, that little almost inland sea due to the Kerch Bridge and the bit where Russia connects almost to Crimea, and you got the sea north of that. In the Sea of Azov, the ship of the occupiers burned. Russians suffered losses. Yesterday, a fire was recorded in the waters of the Sea of Azov on one of the Coast Guard boats of the border service of the FSB. So FSB, Border Service Coast Guard, don't know who really runs it, but nonetheless, a boat seems to have been hit somehow. Okay, moving on to, this is a war vehicle tracker. Destruction of the Ukrainian S-300 battery. So here he says a battery consisting of at least one Erector launcher and likely a tracking and missile guidance radar, although that's not included on Andrew Perpetua's lost stats, I don't think. But certainly, maybe it was actually. That was he hasn't got the TEL. He's got the, where are we? He's got the launcher, yeah, but not the radar bit there. So we'll see. Anyway, that is war vehicle tracker, sorry. Giving you evidence of that S-300, something of that S-300 being taken out there. Russia says it's ready to transfer the bodies of POWs killed in the Il-76 cargo plane crash. You remember up in Belgorod, this cargo plane was hit by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians were like, yeah, awesome, we just hit that well into Russian territories. And then Russians like, yeah, but it had all of these POWs on. And then it was like, oh my goodness, everyone went a bit quiet. The Ukrainians went a bit quiet because they're wondering what the hell was going on. Anyway, all the OSINT analysis leads one to conclude that there were no POWs on board. It is insanely unlikely that there are POWs on board. There's no evidence being presented. Now, today or yesterday, Russia said that they are ready to hand over to Ukraine the bodies of those killed on the Il-76 plane crash on January the 24th. Russia has alleged that its military aircraft that crashed in Belgorod was destroyed by Ukrainian forces and was carrying 65 POWs. But there's a lot of suspicion about this. So Tetiana Moskalkova, Commissioner of the Human Rights of the Russian Federation, said that Moscow is ready to hand over the bodies of the Ukrainian prisoners who allegedly died when the plane crashed in Belgorod. Quote, regarding the bodies, I immediately informed that we have confirmation of and all the DNA, which according to the conclusion of the examination makes it possible to identify the person. Of course, you can identify whoever you like, but it doesn't mean they're on that plane. I'd love to see what the injuries are of these dead bodies and what state they're in, and whether you can, or whether they have, saying we've got DNA might be implying that they're in such a bad state that you can't tell who they are. So maybe these are bodies that they've got together from other like explosions of Ukrainian equipment, POWs that they've killed, that they've beaten up or whatever, beaten to a pulp, and put them in this haul of 65 bodies. Say, here you go, these guys died in the Il-76 plane crash. And you're like, first of all, can you tell? It'd be really interesting if you can do some scientific analysis of those bodies, if they do actually come. So Dmitry Lubinets, in his turn, stated that Russia still has not handed over the official lists. It's like, here's 65 bodies. Yeah, but were they supposed to be on the list? Oh, we haven't given you a list. Oh, but they were the ones. No, we demand a list. Oh, okay, right. Mikhailo Smith, Dimitro Jones. Okay, there you go. There's a list of 65 bodies. And so they were all killed. You killed them. You killed them, Ukrainians, you bastards. Russia has not confirmed the fact of the deaths of the prisoners, and was not allowed and has not allowed international organisations to the crash site. So they, first of all, they didn't even allow their own emergency services there. It was done by the FSB. They didn't allow international observation or analysis of anything. It was all completely secret. They did release footage, but there were no bodies in the footage. There's a tiny bit of very pink blood over there. Like, but this is like supposedly 70 odd people have died in this plane crash, and yeah, and all the OSINT stuff to do with the direction of the flight. It was taking off, not landing. It had already been to Tehran. It wasn't full of. It couldn't have been full of prisoners, and etc. 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 So this is just, as far as I'm concerned, this is just Russian BS. And as Glasnost says, Russia suddenly found the bodies of 65 Ukrainian soldiers who it said were killed in a plane crash in Russia in January, despite showing no evidence of their bodies at the plane crash. And Russian state media report they were to hand them over to Ukraine, meaning Russia's either executed 65 Ukrainian prisoners and then burnt and chopped them up, and they've collected 65 bodies and body parts from occupied Ukraine and burnt and disfigured them. Exactly what I was just saying there. I mean, goodness me, there's no chance that, as far as I'm concerned, that they are the genuine prisoners that were supposedly on board that plane. Air Defense Forces destroyed 4 of the 4 attack drones. The Russians also attacked with 5 S-300 anti-aircraft guided missiles from the occupied Donetsk region and Belgorod region. There's not been many large waves of Shahed drones recently, so what does that tell you? If you would, you could. You aren't, so you can't, as I keep saying. And the Russians attacking with 5 S-300s is not, is hardly surprising. Because they are very difficult to shoot down, and so they are their first choice of weapon, really, to fire into places close to the Russian border. So Kharkiv gets them. Also down in near the occupied Russian territories, you see Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia get hit by these regularly. Konstantinivka was, though, the place, so that's just behind Bakhmut. A police department, a hospital, 2 kindergartens, a administrative building, 2 enterprises, 5 apartment buildings, and 3 private houses were destroyed. Russians absolutely hammering Konstantinivka. This is a real travesty for Ukraine. And moving on, Russia claims it downed 4 Ukrainian drones over 2 regions amid blackout reports. Russia claimed its air defences shot down 1 drone over Belgorod and 3 more over Nizhny Novgorod oblasts overnight on March 1st. The governor of Russia's Kursk Oblast claimed a drone attack on the region, which allegedly resulted in a blackout and 3 settlements. Ukraine officials did not comment on the claims, which cannot be independently verified. And there is evidence that drones were flying over the Kursk region. So, yeah, they have been active last night, Ukrainian drones. Explosions ran out in Dzержinsk, in Nizhny Novgorod, in Russian Federation. There is a military plant that specialises in the manufacture of ammunition there. The local authorities immediately declared that the plant was working, and an unknown drone was shot down by air defence, although judging by the sounds, something is already not working. So the sounds, I'm not going to play them because I get in trouble, but the sounds will indicate that there's some fairly significant damage done there, but that's all the usual claims of the Russians is they shot everything down, nothing to see. Ukrainian Air Force has destroyed a command post and missile artillery depot of the occupiers near the military base with the help of a JDAM in Chelburda in Kherson. So interesting that they feel they can use JDAMs around Kherson. We've seen them being used there more than anywhere else. These are the American guided glide bombs that have been given to Ukraine, and Ukraine hasn't used them widely because of claims of them being able to be jammed. But it's probably also air defenses and their ability the Ukrainians' ability to get those planes up and dropping them in places that they need to without risking the planes too much. But it appears that maybe the Russian air defense systems around the Dnipro River have been significantly degraded to the point where they can use JDAMs, and we are starting to see JDAMs be used a lot more there by the Ukrainians. So that's really good news for the Ukrainians. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. So Putin is trying to stop people mourning at the funeral of Alexei Navalny, which is taking place right now as I speak. They are lining the streets now. He originally he made it so that no hearse providers could provide. They were all booked out. All hearse providers were booked out today. So it was trying to stop, basically, the funeral from taking place. Putin's sick society continues to torment Navalny and his grieving loved ones, says Tim White. Russia finally returned the body. The funeral is booked for tomorrow, but miraculously, all the hearses are busy. At first, we were not allowed to rent a funeral hall to say goodbye to Alexei. Now, when just a funeral service is supposed to take place in the church, ritual agents tell us that not a single hearse agrees to take the body there. Unknown people call all teams and threaten them not to take Alexei's body anywhere. So, the hearse suppliers have been threatened by the state. Dear MAGA, arrested for going to a funeral. This is authoritarianism. So if you support, Putin, this is who you're supporting, which is killing the opposition leader, trying to kill him previously a number of times, imprisoning him for the rest of his life, and then he dies either in natural causes or he's killed, more likely killed by the Russians, and then not giving his body back until one presumes the poison or whatever it is in his blood has gone, has dissipated, then giving his body back and saying that basically you can't have a funeral hall and you can't have a hearse. And then Roman Golovanov has urged authorities to arrest any attendees of the funeral unless they can prove to be relatives of the deceased. DNA samples, and only then can you mourn. I mean, this is what liberty looks like in Russia. I mean, honestly, Russia is insane. And if you support Russia, if you're so anti-Ukraine that you support Russia, like, what's going on in your head, you mentalist? Fair to say that there is some tension in Moscow this morning, 2.5 hours before the funeral of Alexei Navalny. Will Yulia Navalnaya be there? Will the fascists even try to arrest her? Will the public protest? Tons of trucks for prisoners are there. So they've got riot trucks, prisoner trucks. They are getting ready to arrest people for mourning. The funeral of Alexei Navalny is scheduled to take place, and the reports are that police cars and riot police are being deployed to the location of the funeral. Meanwhile, people are gathering at the temple to bid farewell to Navalny. The funeral is scheduled to begin in 3 hours. Well, actually, that's pretty much now. Indeed, this is one of the latest videos of a really long queue. So actually, I was worried that there'd be no one because people would be afraid. It'd be great if this gathers momentum. The queue to the church where Navalny's farewell service will take place is getting longer and longer. Looks like it's going to require another special operation launched by the Kremlin. We'll see what happens. And meanwhile, at the same time, Putin has announced tax increases for Russians. I wonder who's desperate for money. Turns out, actually, I do have something on that. This is probably relevant to... Is it now? No, it's not. Where's it gone? I think it's in my geopolitical section. So just to add to that, Russia have absolutely chomped through their reserves. Particularly their gold reserves, as far as I can work out. And they've got a lot of reserves now in Chinese yuan, which means they can only spend it in China, really. So, there you go. This is interesting coming from Tucker Carlson. I believe Tucker Carlson, well, apparently he's still incensed at the Jon Stewart Daily Show bit. So when Jon Stewart came back, I think it was his first show, the comeback. He's doing Daily Show once a week now, and he came back and he did an absolutely superb takedown of Tucker Carlson in Moscow. And that interview, the Jon Stewart's, you've got to see it, it's really very good. And apparently Tucker Carlson is still incensed about that. And I think he may come to a realization that really he was just doing the bidding of Putin. I think he's come to a realization that the whole thing just made Putin look good and didn't make Tucker Carlson look anything like an independent journalist. It made Tucker Carlson look like a lapdog of Putin. I think he must have some self-awareness to think that that's the case. Anyway, he's now said in an interview, I forget who it's with, I showed you a little bit the other day, but actually something else he said in there was denazification, which is what Putin gives as a justification for invading Ukraine. I thought it was one of the dumbest things I'd ever heard. I hate that whole conversation because it's not real. It's just ad hominem. Calling them, the Ukrainians, Nazis, it's like, I thought it was childish. So Tucker Carlson, that's pretty much the most sensible thing he said for a very, very long time. But having said that, he's also broadly advocating that view. It's childish, but you've given someone the opportunity to platform that more than anyone else on Earth. More than any other entity outside of Russia in the Western world, you have platformed that view. So you can say it's childish all you like, but you are complicit in the disinformation that is reaching people. And I showed you that video of American voters saying, I now think Putin is all right because I watched Tucker Carlson's interview. 18-year-old Daria Kozyreva has been imprisoned and she's facing 5 years, a 5-year sentence for what? For reading Shevchenko poem. So he's a Ukrainian poet on the anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I mean, this is what freedom looks like in Russia. So yeah, in prison and facing insane criminal charges for posting lines from Shevchenko's testament. A court in St. Petersburg has remanded the 18-year-old in custody after she was arrested over a poster with an excerpt from the great Ukrainian poet Taras Shevchenko and the poem Testament. What a terrible country Russia has become. The United States joined 44 countries invoking the OSCE Moscow mechanism to establish a mission to examine allegations of arbitrary detentions of Ukrainian civilians and other abuses by Russia's forces. We remain committed to supporting Ukraine and holding Russia accountable, says Matthew Miller. This is good news. They're just the war crimes and the egregious contravention of human rights legislation is just terrible, and it's continued. I mean, I've just given you one example. It's just horrific. Right, the Ukrainian IT army has attacked the largest internet portal in Russia, mail.ru. The Ministry of Digital Transformation reports almost all users lost access to their accounts. Access to email means not only mail, but also the ability to recover passwords, pass two-factor verification, and access to devices. So your ability to actually, you know how many times you get sent, oh, we've just sent you a 6-digit verification code, you need to put that in. Well, if you can't get onto your emails, you can't put that in. So that stops people being able to access a whole load of things within Russia. And just finally on sort of disinformation, just to talk about Twitter, because I use Twitter so much, it's integral to what I do. I would use other sources if I could, but there's no other single source that does what Twitter does. Unfortunately, it is run by someone who I think is in the pockets of Putin. Well, you wonder why he's politically positioning himself so strongly where he is at the moment. So very pro-Republican, pro-Trump. Why is that? Even though he's got an interesting relationship with Trump? Well, it turns out, and this is a very good article on NBC News, it turns out that a second Trump term could very well shift the administrative and regulatory state in ways that would benefit Musk's companies. So basically, Musk is looking, if Trump gets in, he will make gazillions, right? Because a second term, if it happens, will result in federal agencies shifting their focus away from investigations into regulatory compliance issues. So we know that Trump wants to scrap regulation, right? But the problem is regulation is good in the IT sector because disinformation. Like, how many times do I have to say this? Like, yeah, freedom of speech is lovely, but freedom of speech can be manipulated by nefarious state actors, and it can be weaponized to disinform your public and mess around and interfere with your elections, as has happened and is continuing to happen since, for the last 10 years plus. Now, if you understand how much Musk is being investigated, here's just a quick bullet points list. So Tesla Autopilot is being investigated. Tesla benefits are being investigated. SpaceX hiring is being investigated. Alleged racial harassment. Tesla union. SpaceX firings. Twitter or ex-employee firings. Twitter acquisition fallout. Funding secured. SEC is famously looking into Musk's doings, privacy on Twitter or X, satellite internet, and so on and so forth. There are huge investigations going on right across Elon Musk's holdings at the moment, and that is why he's positioning himself where he does position himself. It's all about understanding why people do what they do. So when we go to, well, why is he on Russia's side predominantly in his rhetoric? Almost all of what he says at the moment is pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine. And we know that he's got an absolute necessity to toe the party line in Russia because they control so many natural resources that he needs from Russia, and it's exactly the same in China. So for SpaceX, for Tesla, for Starlink, for all of these businesses, well, not so much for Twitter really, but for SpaceX and whatnot, he and Tesla, he needs Russian and Russian and Chinese natural resources. He can't operate without them, and so therefore he will be held to account by those nations who will be saying, you need to do X, Y, and Z if you want to continue getting this stuff that allows you to still maintain your businesses, to be the billionaire that you are. You can't do that without Russian and Chinese compliance, or compliance with Russia and China. Follow the money, and then you see, well, why is he positioning himself so overtly politically in the US? Follow the money, follow the money. Anyway, there you go. That's how I'm going to finish it today. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care. Speak soon.